Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for having the time to see all these projects. It's very humbling. And this one is going to be slightly different from the rest in the sense that, it's the end of the day. Everybody might be tired. So I decided to make this very simple and relaxing at this point. So one of our colleagues at the industry innovation team, Shanghai, says that data science is teamwork, basically. So you might have experienced this when you're working during these internship projects, when you co-author a paper, or just simply when you work with a bunch of people just to get things done, right? But this presentation has a special focus on collaborative projects that involve, technical and non-technical participants, and sometimes it involves also an audience. So one more thing before we start, some lessons might sound maybe too general, but then I'll get into the details with specifics in my experience during these past 8 months. And also, just one more thing before we start with the lessons. Let me give you some context about Vector and the actual collaborative projects team. So Vector gets funding from 3 sources, okay? So the federal government through CFAR, the provincial government through the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, and also different companies that act as, as sponsors. So basically, Vector has this team called Industry Innovation as a way to engage with them on a regular basis. And within that, they have different programs. So for example, they might have business development, talent attraction, professional development, face-to-face, you name it. There are different programs. And one of them is called collaborative projects, okay? In those ones, we are bringing participants from, for example, the academia and also the industry. We put them together to produce something. So for the past 8 months, I've been working on these 4 projects. There are way more than this one. So the first one is AI gradient. The next one is NLP long haulers. The next one is Accelerate AI, and finally, computer vision. So for this presentation, I'll be mostly focusing on computer vision, which is a knowledge transfer project, which means that you're bringing methodologies and transfer that specific knowledge to other people, in this case, people in the industry. It's a very technical project. And the other one that I will briefly touch on is Accelerate AI, which is not necessarily that technical. It's more of a senior level, and it requires you to be more like a client facing. And with that in mind, let me just start with my first, lesson, which is gonna be cultivate and leverage empathy. So people are gonna say, wow, she's crazy. What is she talking about? Why is she talking about this to a Vector audience? And I think this is a very important aspect just to keep in mind. And I will bring some context into this. So if we talk about computer vision, our objective for computer vision was to transfer computer vision techniques, as I said, I don't know, like you read a paper or you bring an idea that maybe someone from the academic came up with, and try to turn them into more practical use cases. So something that could be useful for sponsor participants. So during that project, we had 3 main teams. One focused on images and the other 2 focused on video. So I was managing the one that was focused on video. And our main objective was to detect actions, okay? And try to see what kind of methodologies could be useful for that. So I had in my team people who were like PhD students and also people from companies in the telecommunication and insurance industry. So the question was like, how should I bring them together, right? So the first element that I had to relearn was that, people have diverse interests and skills, right? Different backgrounds. When you add the aspect of culture, it could also influence the way you relate to others, right? Some cultures are high contact, the other ones are not as much. So in order to deal with this, we conducted a survey just to know their interests, the skills and motives. And of course, by the time you're working with other people in this team, I'm not asking you to do the same because they're gonna see you a bit creepy, but what I'm trying to bring up is that, you have to dedicate some time to know each other. At least at the beginning, I think that's a very important aspect because it will give you some context into what their motivations are. Of course, you can also ask them what the motive of this project is. Some of them might not have a clear understanding. onto why they are doing this, but then you will see that over time. But that's a very important thing because that's going to be their main drive, right? And finally, it's also good to know what organizations they belong to, even what team they belong to, because you will understand what makes them came to this project. Maybe they are I don't know, like a computer scientist on like a very, let's say, a low level. So probably their control over the rest of the hierarchy is slightly difficult. So, for example, they need to work on this project more than anybody else. Or maybe it's a very senior person who just out of curiosity decided to join the project, right? So there are different things that you will have to understand their context, and that's what's gonna make you oversee what kind of potential challenges or opportunities might arise in the future, right? Which brings me to the next one. And I think this is going to be slightly harder to develop, which is you might need to read them at certain points. Once again, sometimes people might not have a clear understanding into why they want to join a project or why they should consider this specific approach to solve this specific objective, right? So this is not easy because it requires a lot of practice, as I said, getting cues based on, I don't know, personality to skill. And some of us might take some time to develop. However, there are some, concrete aspects that you could consider at this point. The first one is that put what you learn from them into context. So once again, so we have the first area, which is something that I would definitely suggest you consider at the beginning, asking them super basic questions, the motives and so on, but then you bring them into context, okay? So for example, let's say that that one of your team members is not dedicating much time to the project because at some point during those informal conversations that you had in the past, you knew that he or she is submitting a very important paper, for example. So you know that this is happening, and I know that it's something that you can put on in a very structural system, but things do not work that way. I'm talking about very human relationship kind of aspects that we people learn with time, and this is something that I really urge people in AI to consider when they're working with others, right? Another thing that is important here is that when issues arise, sometimes we feel frustrated because some people might not work the way we are expecting or we had agreed on, right? So hence this specific second point talks about an important balance you will have to manage if you lead collaborative projects. So when this happens, try not to assume the worst. So for example, you're not gonna think, oh, this person doesn't care or he or she is lazy or stuff like that, because that will predispose you and it won't work out for you at all. Like you will have this understanding of this person of being good at working, and then that's it. It will be hard to get back up. So my suggestion is that try to go in good faith, but also do your due diligence. A good example of this is that not necessarily for Vector, it was another project that I did in the past. You are like I was having an issue with a person who was not constantly working in the team, and then at the end of the day, I realized that she was expecting a baby. So it could have been a very important aspect to keep in mind. However, when I talk about the due diligence aspect, is that I try to account for it. Yes, I know that she might have certain issues, and I will try to do as best as I can to assign the resources somewhere else, right? That's what matters, especially when you are in a high performance team. So a high performance team is it's a team in which each participant takes such a critical role in the team. If that person is not there, the entire team will suffer. So you really need to build something that is trust. And how you do that? By considering these aspects that I'm just mentioning. I'm trying to be very, very specific into how could be considered. But once again, I'm urging you to consider this human element. The next one, very general, it sounds teamwork is critical, but I want to bring something up here. The real type of teamwork, okay? So I'm just gonna give you an example by what I mean by real kind of teamwork. So this is something called YOLO architecture, not to be confused with YOLO, right? Even though the authors took as a, as an inspiration of YOLO to do this specific architecture. So this was used for the computer vision project. And why am I showing this? First of all, because I just want to catch your attention, but also it's also because I want to, I want to explain what we are trying to do with the project. So in short, we wanted to explore this framework for video-related use cases. So as you can see, there are two backbones here. So the 2D, which basically captures spatial features. In this case, it was more like an object detection kind of task. While the other one, which is in a 3D CNN, captures contextual or spatial temporal information. So they are fused through an attention module. And then at the end, it passes through a convolutional layer and it outputs a bounding box around the object and also the label that brings the action that this person is doing. That's how it is working. So our main focus here, or the overall objective of my team, was to explore some of the use cases that participants were mostly interested in, right? So some wanted to explore YOLO in depth, some others, like something like hyperparameter training with a different data sets, such as ABA, you name it. There are some others that were more interested in checking how it can be used in traffic anomalies. So it is based on a data set which detects objects, in this case, cars, bicycles, and so on, and an anomaly, which is the action, in this case, is crashing or just parked, or it's going slowly or something like that. So it's trying to bring those things into context. And the last one, they wanted to see if we could leverage that into different healthcare applications. In this case, this is a gallbladder surgical procedure. So why am I bringing this to talk about teamwork? So as you know, we tend as a society to consider teamwork as just leave them and everybody works on their own, right? I didn't want that for the team that I was working on, so I decided to do the following. We started with the baseline. So we had a common objective, which was basically exploring and reproducing YOLO by reading the paper and try to run it. Then the idea here was to talk the same language, right? Be at the same level at the beginning. And also it gave us an opportunity to know each other a bit better, which once again, is related to the empathy section that I just mentioned. And we also needed some alignment. So this area was extremely important for the first aspect. Then we split the teams for the second stage, but I wanted them to interact and share their knowledge nonetheless, right? So I made them listen to the other substreams and, participate. Of course, it's hard to do so or to do that at the beginning because, you have your area of expertise, but I noticed with time that they started to help each other. And that was something that I really wanted to do. So you had people at the YOLO advanced section that at the end of the day was providing some sort of, advice to the gallbladder surgery team. By the time they were listening, their issues or advances and stuff like that. So that's something that brought this extra value of teamwork. One more thing that we did was ask for feedback and act immediately on those ones. So for example, it was easy to, one of our team members suggested that instead of just having one meeting, we should have two meetings, the second one being, a working section. So that's something that we did immediately, and that made the process quite faster. Another thing is that participants, they adapted to the circumstances. Once again, this is a high performance team. Each person is extremely important. So as we got to know each other and spend more time building trust at the beginning, right, it was easier for them to take over if needed. So if one person was not available, the other one would just go there and without even asking, this person would just work like double. So that was actually pretty good. Another thing that was in terms of, the adaptability based on feedback, if you notice here, this YOLO advanced at the top, it's shorter than the traffic anomaly and gallbladder surgery. We decided to pivot and stop that part because that person wanted to mostly focus on traffic anomaly. And we did that because we considered that it was just better, given that this last two use cases were more relevant for the objectives of the project. One last important thing is that in terms of teamwork, we reinforce routines. You are you are quite familiar with reinforcement learning. This is a very human way to explain it for this specific case. Reinforced routine is extremely relevant here. So different examples of this. We never skip the meeting as a team, and I know that this sounds silly, but when you keep those specific meetings going, even if you don't have that much to say, it's still important because something will arise anyway, and the team members working on it will be expecting something. Their mind is already focused on that, and that's why things get rolling, things get smoother. Another thing that we did is that we had bi-weekly presentations just to give our own updates to the rest of the project members. So our presentation always had the same 3 sections. So an intro that you see here always had the same thing: the project goals, the actions taken, what was done. The second one was the updates, and the final one was some sort of a roadmap, right? So the format never changed, and it helped us to get that mind space that we needed to know what to expect, right? Finally, each member, or basically I asked them to present with me every time we had those bi-weekly presentations. So this was another good way to keep them invested in others projects. So they knew that they had to learn something, to keep something in mind by the time they're presenting. Hence, they're more familiar with others projects, and that was quite useful. So yeah, the final I would say lesson that I would like to share here is work in your communication skills. Again, that sounds extremely general. I'm going to give more specifics into this. And I'm not talking about grammar or stuff like that. I'm talking more about this specific case. I've noticed from people within the team that I was in that they are extremely brilliant, and by the time they do, for example, they want to explain whatever they have been doing in their papers. Unfortunately, they say what is on the right side, and that's something that frustrates me the most. Basically, what I would suggest is that you have to understand your audience. A good example of it is our legal and compliance work stream of the accelerated AI project that I believe Ryan has explained a bit of it. So basically, you have to understand who are they, what's your audience. You have to understand from the end, what do you want them to learn? Why are they there to hear you? What are you going to bring to them, right? So that's a very important aspect. You might want to learn a bit more about them, who they are. Maybe you can check their LinkedIn or something like that. You can actually ask the person who is hosting, who is the audience that will be listening to your presentation, right? And it will give you some context. It will be super useful. The second one is that you have to keep things simple. I've seen presentations, especially for highly technical people who want to give the very detailed kind of elements. And the problem with that is that people might not pay much attention to it. Just go with something simple, but you have to be prepared. So usually a good presentation has a very short set of slides, and then you have a bunch of backup slides, because you want people just to be interested to ask you questions in the Q&A, for example. And by the time they ask questions, you have supporting material that you can give. If they ask you for more details, then you can give them. But don't go into a very detailed type of approach if you are presenting something to convince someone to do something, right? And finally, focus on the narrative. This is probably an important aspect here, because there's something called the hero's journey, which is usually it's used in movies and stuff like that. So it's some sort of a common template of stories that involve a hero that goes into adventure. There's a crisis, then he comes back after fighting, I don't know, the dragon or whatever, and then it's transformed and changed. In the context of collaborative projects, you have to consider something like a problem statement, right? So there's an issue that you need to solve. There's a problem that a person is trying to solve at this point, is having issues trying to do it. There's a methodology that you have for your project. This is the model that I'm dealing with. The results are this one, and a very important aspect, which is next steps. What could have been done if you had more resources? If you start with the problem at the beginning, that's going to bring a lot of attention, because people need to understand how to solve something. What's the issue that I'm having? and in what way I can bring that up. And that's something that I've noticed from highly technical people explaining things, that sometimes they just come up with the solution right away, but then people might not fully understand the problem that they're trying to solve. So that's something that I've noticed here. Yep. So to sum up, working in collaborative projects is not easy. People have different interests, especially when they belong to different organizations. Working in collaborative projects is not easy when you add diversity, but at the same time, it makes it extremely powerful. So like many of you, I come from another country. Some of us come from a different area. Mine is business. So yeah, it's hard to transition into project management for AI, but it's definitely worth it. So in the same way that I've been able to learn from such brilliant people like you, I'd like to invite you to consider these elements when working on your projects. It takes time. You might get frustrated, but when you get it, it's truly amazing when you see things working. So yeah, that's my presentation.